The Corner Spoon Diner had always been the kind of place where nothing surprising ever really happened. Locals drifted in on schedule, sat in the same booths, ordered the same meals, and left tips tucked neatly under coffee cups. The jukebox hummed soft classics in the background, and the clink of silverware against chipped porcelain was the diner's steady heartbeat. Everyone thought they knew everything about everyone. Nothing new, nothing secret, nothing hidden. That was why, when Clara raised her hands that day and began signing to man at the counter, the entire diner seemed to freeze. It wasn't just a gesture. It was the ease of it, the smooth, fluent way her fingers moved, like water flowing from an unseen spring. A quick, graceful motion of her hand said, "It's okay. I understand. Do you want coffee?" Her expression matched the warmth of her hands, calm and certain, as though she had been waiting her whole life to speak in this silent language again. The man's eyes widened. Then, as if some invisible burden had lifted, they softened. His fingers replied with slow, careful precision, "Yes, please." "Black." Clara's lips curled into a small smile. She nodded, turning back toward the counter with a lightness in her step, leaving behind a silence thicker than steam rising off hot plates. From the kitchen window, Ed, the cook, peeked out with raised brows. At her usual table by the window, Mrs. Langford froze mid-bite, soup spoons suspended in the air. Even the jukebox stuttered for a beat, its notes faltering as if the machine, too, was trying to make sense of what it had just seen. No one in town had ever known Clara could sign. And in the farthest booth, shielded by a newspaper, sat a man who also hadn't known. Behind that paper was Russell Avery, founder of Avery Tech, silent owner of half the county's real estate, and one of the most influential men in the state. Few people ever recognized him, and fewer still ever dared to look too closely. Wealth hadn't altered his face much, just a streak of gray at his temples. But he'd long ago grown used to walking unseen. For years he let silence surround him, never expecting to be understood. But now, behind the safety of his newspaper, something stirred. Watching Clara's hands move with humility and grace, he felt something ache deep inside his chest. He lowered the paper slightly, eyes following her as she worked, and, for the first time in years, he simply watched. Later, when Clara returned to the table with a steaming mug, she lingered just a little longer. She spelled out slowly with her hands, "Is this hot enough?" The man looked up, startled but grateful. His lips stretched into a smile, small but real, and he gave her a thumbs up. It was more than thanks. It was relief. After his meal, he pulled a napkin from the dispenser, scribbling in blocky, uneven handwriting. When he left, Clara returned to clear the table and found it folded neatly beside the empty cup. Her breath caught as she read the words. "Thank you. No one has spoken to me like a person in a long time." Her fingers trembled around the napkin. For a long moment, she stood frozen. Then, quietly, she folded the note and slipped it into the pocket of her apron, sliding it beside the envelope that held her month's rent. That night, rain slicked the sidewalks as she walked home beneath her umbrella. Street lamps cast halos in the puddles, and she found her thoughts circling the man, not just his silence, but the heaviness in his eyes. It struck her that she had likely served dozens of people like him over the years, people who walked into the diner carrying invisible burdens she had never seen. How many had she missed simply because their voices didn't sound like everyone else's? The next morning, Clara found an envelope slipped under the diner's front door. No name, no handwriting she recognized. Inside was a flyer from a local nonprofit promoting sign language classes and disability job programs. On the back of the card, a sticky note read, "You should teach. You'd be wonderful." She showed it to Ed, who shrugged, though his eyes softened with something like pride. That afternoon, at precisely the same hour the silent man had come the day before, another figure sat in the corner booth, once again behind a newspaper. Russell Avery. He hadn't planned to return, but he couldn't stop thinking about Clara's hands, about the way she had stepped forward without hesitation or fanfare. Something inside him, long dulled by boardrooms, contracts, and empty evenings in echoing houses, had shifted. For the first time in years, he wasn't just watching life happen from a distance. He was part of it. And Clara, though she didn't yet know it, had just taken her first step onto a path that would soon change both of their lives. By the end of that week, Clara caught herself glancing at the door whenever the bell chimed, her heart stuttering with questions. Would the silent man return, the one with the soft, grateful eyes? Or would the mystery figure who left the non-profit flyer reveal themselves? The flyer lived in her coat pocket now. She had unfolded and refolded a dozen times, smoothing the creases until the paper thinned. Each time, she imagined what it would feel like to stand before a group of people and teach them the quiet language that had once saved her. Her grandmother had taught her to sign when she was just a child, after losing her hearing in her 60s. Clara remembered long summer afternoons on the porch, sticky with melted popsicles, her grandmother rocking gently while Clara spelled out clumsy words with jelly-stained fingers. Together, they had laughed until the sun dipped below the trees. After her grandmother passed, Clara hadn't signed again, not until a moment in the diner when her hands had moved on instinct, resurrecting a memory she thought she had buried. The next few days passed quietly, but something had shifted. People looked at Clara differently now. With curiosity, yes, but also admiration. One of the local high school boys asked if she could show him how to sign "thank you" for his sister. Mrs. Langford leaned in one day and whispered, "It's a gift, dear. Don't waste it." And when the mute man returned, this time with dry clothes and a crooked smile, Clara felt warmth bloom in her chest. They signed back and forth for nearly 10 minutes, the man's eyes brightening more with each exchange. She didn't see the man in the corner booth again until Friday. Russell had intended to leave town by then. His company was pressing him for updates, and properties awaited his review. But something about the diner pulled him back, and it wasn't the coffee. That Friday, Clara noticed him the moment he walked in. This time, he didn't hide behind a newspaper. He nodded a quiet hello as he slid into the booth. She hesitated before bringing him coffee. Black, no cream. "You're new in town?" she asked gently. He looked up at her, his voice even but low. "Just passing through?" She smiled politely, already turning away. But then his question stopped her. "Do you know sign language?" She blinked, caught off guard. "I do. A little more than basic." He nodded once, something unreadable flickering in his eyes. "That's rare. Not many people take the time." Something about the way he said it made her glance at him a second longer. There was kindness there, but also loneliness. A loneliness she recognized. "Someone once took the time for me," she said softly. Then she turned and walked away. Clara didn't know why she kept replaying that conversation in her mind. His words, "Not many people take the time," lingered like an echo. She'd heard similar phrases before, usually spoken with pity. But the way he'd said it had been different. Quiet, measured, but weighted with personal truth. By Saturday evening, the diner buzzed with its usual weekend crowd. The bell over the door chimed nonstop as families filed in, boots tapping against the floor and laughter rising above the clatter of dishes. Yet Clara found herself distracted. Every time the door swung open, her gaze flickered instinctively, searching for either of them, the man who spoke with his hands or the man who was behind his newspaper. Both showed up. The silent man arrived first, sliding onto a stool at the counter. Clara greeted him with a smile, her fingers moving easily now. "Good evening." The usual? His response was immediate, his hands sure. "Yes." And "Thank you" again. Minutes later, as Clara refilled a family's sodas, the door opened again. A tall figure stepped in, his coat carrying the chill of the night air. He paused only briefly before choosing the booth in the far corner, the same one as before. Russell Avery. The moment Clara saw him, her pulse skipped. It wasn't attraction, not exactly, though his presence was impossible to ignore. It was more a sense that his being there meant something, as if two parallel lines in her life were about to intersect. She brought him coffee without asking, setting the steaming cup on the table with a nod. He looked up at her, those sharp yet weary eyes softening for just an instant. "Thank you," he said simply. She hesitated. "You come here often now." "Routine," he replied, a corner of his mouth twitching. "Old habits die hard." She almost laughed. This place isn't much of a habit, for most people. It's ordinary. Ordinary can be extraordinary in the right hands, he countered. His words struck her more deeply than he likely intended. She thought of her grandmother again, of sticky fingers shaping letters on summer afternoons, of the silent man smiling across the counter just last week, his gratitude written on a napkin, of how her hands had remembered what her voice had forgotten. Clara drew in a breath. Someone left me something the other day, a flyer, about teaching sign language. Do you know anything about that? Russell didn't flinch, but his gaze sharpened ever so slightly. And if I did... She tilted her head, studying him. Then I'd want to know why. For a long moment, he said nothing. The din of the diner filled the silence between them. Plates clinking, children laughing, Ed shouting, "Order up!" from the kitchen. Finally, he folded his hands on the table. Because, he said slowly, too many people go unheard. And someone like you could change that. Her breath caught. It was the closest thing to a confession she'd heard from him yet. When she turned to leave, he added quietly, "Don't let the world convince you that your gift is small." The next week brought change. Word spread quickly that Clara knew sign language. Teenagers stopped by the diner after school, curious and eager to learn. A mother with a young deaf son approached her shyly, asking if Clara would mind teaching him a few basics. Even Ed started practicing, fumbling through the alphabet with clumsy fingers that made both of them laugh until tears streamed down their faces. Clara found herself teaching between tables, in corners of the diner during slow hours, and once even on the sidewalk outside, while her apron still smelled of coffee and bacon grease. Each interaction lit a spark inside her. For the first time in years, she felt her life stretching toward something bigger, something meaningful. And always, in the corner booth, Russell watched. He was careful not to interfere. He asked few questions and gave little away. But his presence was steady, his eyes following quietly as Clara's world began to open. She noticed the way his shoulders eased when the silent man laughed at her jokes, the way his jaw softened when a child signed back to her for the first time. Russell had spent decades building walls around himself, walls of wealth, of silence, of distance. But Clara, without even realizing it, was dismantling them brick by brick. One rainy evening, when the diner had emptied early, Clara caught him still sitting in his booth long after his plate had been cleared. She wiped her hands on her apron and approached. "You don't talk much," she said lightly. He looked up, surprised by her bluntness, then chuckled. "And here I thought I was blending in." "Not really. You're more noticeable than you think." Something flickered in his eyes. Regret? Maybe, or longing. "I've spent most of my life unnoticed," he admitted. "On purpose." Clara leaned against the edge of the booth. "Why?" His gaze dropped to his hands, resting on the table. "Because when you speak too loudly, people stop listening. And when you build an empire, people only hear what they want." She frowned, puzzled by his words. Empire? Who was this man, really? Before she could ask, he changed the subject. "If you ever decided to teach, you wouldn't just be helping one person. You'd be opening doors for countless others. Imagine what that would mean." She hesitated. "It sounds bigger than me." "Exactly," he said softly. "The best things usually are." 2 weeks later, an envelope arrived in Clara's mailbox. No return address, but inside was a check large enough to cover rent for an entire year. Attached was a typed note. "For your future classroom. Consider this an investment." Her hands trembled as she held it. She didn't need to ask who had sent it. She already knew. She brought the check to the diner the next day, tucked safely in her apron. When she saw Russell in his usual booth, she marched straight over and placed it on the table. "I can't accept this," she said firmly. He didn't look at the check. He looked at her. "It's not charity. It's belief. In me? In what you're meant to do." Her throat tightened. "Why me?" Russell studied her for a long moment, then leaned back, his expression unreadable. "Because sometimes the world needs quiet voices to remind it how to listen." The first class met in the diner after hours. Just 6 people at first. The silent man, the mother and her little boy, 2 high school students, and Ed, who insisted on getting the hang of it before the arthritis sets in. Clara's hands moved gracefully, confidently, as she taught them the alphabet, common greetings, simple sentences. The silent man beamed brighter than she'd ever seen. The little boy laughed when it had messed up, "Thank you," 3 times in a row. And when she caught Russell standing in the doorway, watching quietly with the faintest smile, her heart swelled. It wasn't long before 6 people became 12, then 20. Word spread beyond the diner. Local schools reached out, churches asked for workshops, and soon Clara was teaching classes in borrowed community halls. One evening, after a long day of lessons, she stood outside the diner with Russell. The neon sign buzzed faintly above them, casting soft red light across the wet pavement. "I don't know how to thank you," she said quietly. "You already have," he replied. She tilted her head. "By what?" "Teaching. By reminding me that silence doesn't have to mean emptiness." His voice was low, almost fragile. Her chest tightened. "You've carried silence a long time, haven't you?" He didn't answer directly. Instead, he said, "There's a house, old place just outside town. It's been empty too long. I was thinking maybe it's time it wasn't." She blinked. "What do you mean?" His eyes met hers, steady and certain. "The quiet house. A place where people can learn, gather, and be heard, even without words. You should be the one to open it." The words hung between them like a promise, reshaping the night air. Clara felt her breath catch, her world tilting on its axis. For the first time, she saw the man not just as a stranger in a corner booth, but as someone who had been waiting for her, for this, for a chance to turn silence into something beautiful. And with that, the first spark of the quiet house was lit.